The girl had no name worth remembering. Folks in the high plains might have once called her kin, but they were bones now. Starved out or buried under prairie storms, left in the silence between riverbeds where no crops ever grew. She wandered past fence posts and the jagged teeth of barbed wire, barefoot, eyes hollowed by hunger, with a gunny sack on her shoulder and nothing in it but a broken comb and a copper button. Winter wasn't supposed to come this early. The snow had turned dry, sharp as grit, and the wind scoured the land like it had a personal grievance. She slept in a collapsed root cellar for 2 nights, chewing on leather when her stomach begged. By the third, her body felt like paper, and she began speaking aloud to no one, just to hear a voice. She walked in the direction of smoke. That was how he found her, though in truth it was his dog, a grizzled blue heeler named Ketch, who barked and snarled near the east fence until the man came out with a rifle and a caution in his gut. He expected a coyote. What he found was worse. She stood on the edge of his field like a ghost too tired to vanish, filthy, too thin, with matted black hair and cracked lips. Her dress was child-sized and torn at the hem, and her bare arms were cut from brambles. "Who sent you?" he asked, not kind, not curious, defensive. She didn't speak, just blinked at him slow and then dropped to her knees. The rancher's name was Lyle Bray, 41, unwed, and not known for his hospitality. Folks in the township 5 miles west said he spoke more to his cattle than to people, hadn't been in church since his father died. Didn't drink, didn't laugh, didn't bury his horses when they broke. But something in the girl's collapse put a weight behind his ribs. He carried her inside like one might carry a dying ewe, set her on the rug by the stove, wrapped her in a wool blanket that still smelled of cedar. He fed her broth, just 1 spoonful at first, then 2, and she sipped it like it hurt to be alive. That first night she slept by the fire, barely breathing. When she whimpered in her sleep, Lyle went outside and chopped wood until dawn, as though the sound of her nightmares might splinter his own silence if he didn't. By the second week she could walk. By the third she was hanging laundry out back and sweeping the floors. She never asked what she was to him. He never asked where she came from. Names hadn't passed between them yet. It was as though both understood instinctively the danger of speaking something that fragile into the world. Words had a way of breaking what silence preserved. Lyle left her a pair of boots one morning by the stove. Small, worn, but laced tight, she stared at them a long while before touching them. At night, he caught himself listening to her breathing from the other room. On the first Sunday of December, she followed him to the barn. No words. Just stood in the open door with her arms crossed, hair combed now, eyes sharper. Lyle was mending a gate latch and didn't turn around, but he knew she was there by the way the air shifted. "You fix things," she said. Her voice was like wind against a tin roof, soft, strange, almost unnatural after so much silence. He straightened, set the hammer down. "I try." She walked into the barn like she'd been doing it all her life, picked up a bridle, ran her fingers over the worn leather. "I don't remember my birthday." "That makes 2 of us," he said. She looked at him with something unreadable. Then, with a calmness he didn't expect, she asked, "Am I your orphan or your wife?" He didn't answer right away. Not out of confusion, but because he heard something inside himself buckle. Something that had been dry and locked shut for a long time. Her question wasn't coy. It wasn't romantic. It was survival. He stepped toward her, slow. Caught the edge of her chin with 2 fingers and lifted her face to his. Her skin was still raw from the wind, her lips pale. "Be my bride forever," he whispered. "I won't touch you till you ask." She looked at him a long time, then nodded. Not yes, not love, but survival. That, at least, they both understood. The snow turned wet by late December. It fell in thick, heavy folds that blanketed the barn roof and bowed the fence rails. She took to wearing one of Lyle's coats, sleeves rolled twice, collar high. In town, he'd said her name was June. He'd spoken it to the postmaster without looking back at her, as if naming her aloud might give her weight in the world again. June didn't flinch, didn't nod, just stared at the yellowed ledger the postmaster kept for records and watched her past stay unwritten. Lyle brought home a marriage license the following Thursday, folded in thirds and tucked beneath a bag of flour. He laid it on the table without ceremony. She signed it with her left hand, shakily, and asked no questions. No ring, no ceremony, just ink and breath and the sound of the kettle boiling over. That night he built her a bed in the root cellar, the one she'd once slept in, starving. He cleaned it out, laid a mattress on the old brick floor, added a lantern, a quilt, a door that shut but never locked. "You're safe down here," he said, eyes level, "if you ever need to be." She didn't thank him, but she slept there that night. Winter was quiet. They spoke less than some married couples might, but not less than they needed. In place of words, they traded glances and small gestures. He fixed the lace on her boots when it frayed. She mended his shirt cuffs in secret. One morning he came in from chopping ice off the water troughs and found the stove already lit, his gloves warmed by the fire. She left without a sound, leaving only the heat behind her. The girl who had once whimpered in her sleep had stopped. Now she dreamed silent, curling tighter beneath the quilt, fists closed. Lyle saw the scars on her back one morning when she was washing by the pump. Thin, raised welts across her shoulders and spine, half faded now. He didn't ask, she didn't hide them. By February she knew the land better than most born to it, could tell by the scent of the air whether frost would linger or melt, could sling hay bales and calm a skittish colt. She learned to shoot. Lyle didn't teach her, not at first. She found the Winchester herself, hanging behind the door, and waited until he'd gone to town before walking out to the north field to practice. When he returned, there were 6 clean holes in the plank fence, tight grouping. He said nothing, just nodded once. She was becoming someone, not the girl he'd found in the snow, not quite the bride she'd been declared, something else, something forged. Trouble arrived on a sleet-gray morning in March. 3 men on horseback, dust-colored coats, too clean for honest work. They rode past the outer fence and stopped by the house, unsmiling. Lyle stood in the doorway with the rifle resting loosely in his hands. He didn't aim it, not yet. "Looking for a girl," the tallest man said. "Dark hair, young, might have come through here weeks back. Belonged to Mr. Hanley over in Crooked Run." June stood behind the door, unseen, silent. Lyle didn't blink. "Ain't seen anyone." The man tilted his head, studying Lyle like he meant to taste the lie. "She stole something. Mr. Hanley wants her back." "Tell Mr. Hanley to fetch his own ghosts," Lyle said. The man's eyes narrowed. "You harboring a runaway, mister?" "No, I'm burying fence posts." His voice dropped colder. "And I got 6 more to put in the ground today." The men didn't move, but they didn't step forward either. Eventually, the horses turned. The men vanished down the ridge, but the promise of them lingered like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. That night, June stood by the root cellar stairs and asked him one thing: "If they come again, will you kill them?" Lyle didn't hesitate. "Yes." She didn't smile, but her hand touched his coat sleeve as she passed. They slept in the same room for the first time 2 nights later. She didn't ask. He didn't move toward her. Just lay still on the cot while she took the quilt beside him, their backs to each other, and the wind rattling outside like a hungry thing with no teeth left to bite. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was no longer just survival. It was something blood-bonded, something born of fire and snowfall and shared silence. Something no man could take. Spring arrived like a bruise spreading slow under pale skin. The thaw revealed dead things, calves that hadn't survived the freeze, fence posts split at the base. A fox curled stiff beside the creek with frost clinging to its whiskers. June walked the land every morning before sunrise, boots leaving dark prints through melting snow, eyes sweeping the tree line. She did not trust quiet days. She studied them like she might study a stranger's face, waiting for the twitch that gave away danger. By April, her body had begun to fill out again. The hollows in her cheeks softened. Her eyes were not kind, but they were no longer hunted. She learned to break a horse from the ground up. Lyle watched from the corral fence, arms crossed. She never asked for praise, and he never gave it, but once she was out of earshot, he smiled, a rare, brittle thing, and rubbed the scar on his own jaw like it itched with memory. She still kept a knife in her boot. Still slept with one hand under her pillow. It was after a rainstorm that the second man came, not one of the three riders from before. This one rode alone, with a face too smooth and a voice like it had been dipped in molasses. Claimed he was a preacher, said he was moving through, offering prayer and sermons and help to any homestead that needed the Lord's blessing. Lyle told him to keep riding. The man smiled too much. Didn't flinch when June came out of the barn carrying the rifle, her finger along the barrel the way Lyle had taught her. "Your wife's got fire," the man said, teeth showing. Lyle stepped between them, eyes flat. "Go." He did. But June didn't sleep that night. She sat on the porch with her boots unlaced and her sleeves rolled high, watching the road. When Lyle came out before dawn to take her place, she only said, "He wasn't a preacher." "Not even close." Lyle nodded. "You know him." "I know what kind of man he is." That was all. The garden came in lane. She grew onions, turnips, cabbage. Lyle built a new chicken coop. June learned to butcher without flinching. There was a softness in her hands when she handled animals, but none in her eyes. One afternoon, while mending saddle straps in the barn, she spoke. "I don't have a mother," she said. Lyle didn't look up. "Me neither." She nodded like that was all she needed to hear. Then, quieter, the man they spoke of, Handley, he sold girls. Kept them penned behind the stable. If they tried to run, he burned them. If they fought, he let the dogs loose. Lyle set the leather down, hands going still. "I took his ledger," she said. "Names, dates, payments, hid it in my dress. That's why they want me, not just because I ran." She didn't cry. She never did. Lyle met her eyes. "Where is it now?" "Buried north pasture, inside a biscuit tin under the cedar stump." He nodded once, then went to the root cellar and returned with a wrapped oilskin pouch. Inside was a Colt Dragoon with notches filed along the grip, 6 notches. He held it out. "When the time comes," he said, "don't hesitate." She took it without speaking. In town, rumors began to spread. A girl seen on Bray land. Dark-haired, quick-footed, some said she was Lyle's niece, others whispered worse. Lyle didn't answer questions. The storekeep tried once, pressing lightly. Lyle paid in silence, tipped his hat, and left with a sack of flour and 24 bullets. June stopped going with him, too many eyes. Instead, she prepared. She trained harder, waking before dawn to run the ridge, build muscle, steady her aim. She studied maps in an old almanac and sketched escape routes in the margins. "I want to go back one day," she said. "Crooked run, not to hide, to burn it." Lyle didn't ask her why. He just said, "I'll ride with you." She didn't thank him. But later that night, when she made supper, she put an extra spoonful of honey in his coffee. Neither of them mentioned it. The firelight burned low. Outside, a wolf howled, and June whispered to herself, "Let them come." June rode out alone before dawn, leaving Lyle a note weighted with a river stone. "Don't follow, back soon." "Let the dog eat my share." She didn't sign it. She never did. Her trail vanished west into the shadowed gulchlands where creeks ran shallow and the land held its breath between rains. She wore Lyle's second-best hat low over her brow and carried the Dragoon under her coat. In her saddlebag was a copy of the ledger she'd unearthed by lantern light 3 nights earlier, still damp with earth, the corners torn. She copied the names on oil paper using the stub of a pencil she'd carved herself. She wasn't running, she was hunting. Quietly, carefully. She had no plan for justice, only fire. By the time Lyle found the note, she was already a day's ride south. He read her words and stood motionless on the porch for a full hour. Ketch sat beside him, head tilted, sensing the shift in wind. When Lyle finally moved, it wasn't to mount up. It was to stack lumber. He built a new rifle rack for the back wall, then sharpened 3 knives, then cleaned his own guns slow and methodically, as if each chamber held a piece of her he couldn't afford to lose. He knew what Crooked Run was, knew the names in that ledger weren't the end of it. There were buyers, enablers, men in collars, and June, for all her grit, wasn't done healing yet, but he didn't chase her. He let her go, not out of trust. Out of respect. In Crooked Run, the town wore its sins quiet. No gallows, no brothel signs, but everyone knew. June arrived on foot, stashing her horse at a ridgeline 2 miles east. She walked through town like someone no longer afraid of being seen, hair braided back, rifle slung loose. She stopped at the dry goods store first, bought a jar of molasses with coins she'd hidden in her boot, watched the clerk's hands. Watched the doors, left without a word. That night she broke into the stable behind the church. It smelled of wet hay and rusted chains. She found the trapdoor easy, knew where to look. It was nailed down now, but she pried it loose with the heel of her boot. Inside, nothing remained but rope burns on the joists and a pile of rat bones. Still, she knelt, touched the dirt. "Not forgotten," she whispered. Then she lit the first match. Lyle rode out 3 days later, not after a sign, not after news, but because the wind changed, because the cattle had stopped grazing at the north fence. Because the sparrows nested lower in the barn rafters, as if the air carried something heavy in it. He packed a saddlebag with hardtack and ammunition, kissed the edge of her quilt, then rode south with no trail to follow but faith. In the third township he heard murmurs, a fire near Crooked Run, the old grain barn gone to smoke, 2 men missing, one found with his tongue cut. Lyle kept riding. He didn't ask names. He didn't need to. He'd seen the ledger. He'd seen the girl she'd been. Now he'd see what she became. June had taken a room above the saloon. She didn't sleep there. She waited, listening, watching who came in, who left. On the fourth night, she followed a man in a brown duster to a linta behind the smithy. Heard him say the girl's still alive to someone she couldn't see. Heard money change hands. She waited until he turned, shot him through the throat. Didn't run, just vanished into the dark like a ghost that belonged to the dirt itself. Lyle found her near the water tower, not hiding, just sitting, rifle across her knees, mud on her boots. She looked up once, then back down. "They know I'm here." "I know." She nodded. "You came anyway." "I didn't come to save you." She turned her face toward him, pale in the moonlight. "Good." Then she stood, and side by side, without a word between them, they walked back into Crooked Run. They killed the first man in silence. He was waiting in a pew, head bowed, like he thought the empty church still held forgiveness. June stepped through the back door, caught the scent of whiskey and cedar, and knew him by the way he leaned, slouched, one hand inside his coat where a pistol would be. She didn't speak, just raised the dragoon and put a bullet through his collarbone. He twitched like a fish hauled too fast from deep water, mouth gasping, fingers fluttering before he slid to the floor with the hymn book still open beside him. Lyle buried the body behind the chapel. June poured lye over the grave. No prayers, no cross, only the smell of earth reclaiming what it never wanted. They moved fast after that, one night in a widow's barn. 2 more camped under a ledge near the flats, eating dried beans and trading the rifle between them. Lyle watched her sleep once, the lines of her face hard and peaceful at the same time. jaw slack, hand curled around the grip of her weapon like it was an extension of her spine. She no longer twitched when branches cracked. She no longer watched the door. She was becoming something dangerous, and he didn't want her to stop. The next man on her list owned a freighting company, clean shirts, dirty hands. He kept his ledgers locked in a desk and his girls locked in upstairs rooms, always near the windows so they could be seen but not heard. June posed as a customer first, hair braided, dress clean. Lyle stood across the street, rifle slung and unreadable. When she stepped into the man's office, she didn't knock. She threw the copy of the ledger onto his desk. His name was on page 4. He blanched, then reached for his pistol. She shot him in the kneecap. Then she took his keyring and went upstairs, opened every door, walked the hallway slow, one hand brushing the wall. The girls inside were silent at first, confused. One asked if she was the new one. June shook her head. "You're not new," she said. "You're free." Then she lit the building on fire from the attic down. Lyle waited outside, watching the flames climb. The girls ran. The town stared. They didn't stay to watch it burn. Word traveled fast. By the end of the week, Hanley himself put a price on her head, said she was a witch, a liar, a whore who murdered good men. Posters went up from Black Hollow to Serpent Bend. Lyle took one, folded it, and tucked it inside her saddlebag without a word. She found it 2 days later and smiled without showing teeth. "Looks nothing like me," she said. He looked at her then, really looked. "No," he agreed. "It don't." They rode toward the high canyons next, not to run, to prepare. There was only one man left between her and Handley now, a marshal who'd taken bribes to look the other way, let the trains carry girls west without questions. He was riding ahead of them, maybe trying to reach Hanley first, maybe trying to vanish. They didn't care. They were done chasing ghosts. Now they hunted the living. June cleaned her rifle every morning. Lyle watched the horizon every night. Their words were fewer now, but heavier. Each one a nail in something being built between them. Not a home, not a love song, something else, a reckoning. And as the sun bled red into the stone ridges and the coyotes cried in the low dark, June whispered one promise into the dirt. "I'm almost there." The canyon held no mercy. The rocks were white and sharp as a butcher's table, the wind constant, scraping the skin raw. Lyle built a linta from canvas and cedar branches. June dug a fire pit with her hands, nails bloodied from prying up stones. They spoke less now. The closeness between them had turned from survival to understanding, and understanding needed no audience. They ate jerky, dry apples, beans boiled down to paste, drank river water thick with silt. Watched the buzzards circle high overhead, never quite sure who they were waiting for. The marshal reached the canyon mouth 2 days ahead of them. June found his camp empty, the fire cold. A half-smoked cigar in the dirt, boot tracks leading east. "Won't get far," she said, crouched low, fingertips in the ash. Lyle didn't disagree. When they caught him, it was in a dry arroyo near the mining trail. He'd made a lean blind out of scrub, tried to disappear. Lyle dragged him out by the collar. The man's face was split with fear, but he reached for his badge anyway, as if it still carried weight. June kicked it from his hand. "I got a daughter," he said. "I never touched those girls, I swear. I only—" She shot once into the dirt near his head. He flinched, pissed himself. The smell soured the air. "You signed papers," she said. "You saw names. Watched fathers hand over daughters like livestock. You said nothing. I had debts. They threatened my wife, my boy." June raised the gun again. Lyle stepped beside her, silent. "You don't get to die with excuses," she said. Then she turned and walked away. Lyle didn't. He finished it clean, one shot to the back of the neck, fast. The kind of death the girls never got. They left the body in the arroyo, face down in the red dust. By nightfall, they were riding south. Only one name left, Hanley didn't live in a town anymore, not exactly. He'd built himself a stronghold, a ranch fortified like a military post, with riders on watch and floodlamps rigged to tree limbs. The kind of place that dared you to come and die on its steps. June wasn't afraid of dying, she just wanted it done right. They waited 5 days, watched the pattern of the guards, mapped every shift change. She marked weak spots in the perimeter, low sections of fence, blind corners near the hay storage, a shallow culvert that ran behind the bunkhouse. On the 6th day, they came in low under moonlight. June wore black. Her face was streaked with soot, her braid tight. Lyle carried wire cutters and a shotgun slung behind his back. They moved like wolves, silent, calculated, cold. When the first man saw them, he didn't get to speak. Lyle broke his neck between two rocks and dragged him into the brush. June knelt by the bunkhouse door. She whispered, "Now," and Lyle set the hay shed ablaze. Chaos tore through the camp. Fire licked the sky. Horses screamed in their stalls. Riders shouted, grabbed rifles, scattered into smoke. She moved through the flames like she belonged in them. She found Handley inside the big house, pacing. Two girls were chained to the bedposts, young, maybe 14. Their eyes were the same kind of broken June remembered from the cellar. Hanley turned too slow. Recognition flickered. "You," he said, "you're dead." June raised the dragoon. "I was." He lunged, fast for a man his size. She stepped left, pulled the trigger. The shot ripped through his thigh. He fell hard, cursing, grabbing for the revolver on his desk. She stepped on his hand. He howled. "You sold us like cattle," she said. "Burned the ones who talked back. Starved the ones who bled. You think this changes anything," he spat. "You think you're justice." She didn't answer. She put the barrel under his chin and pulled the trigger. The back of his head hit the wall in pieces. Lyle found her kneeling beside the chained girls. Her hands trembled as she picked the lock. The dragoon lay cooling on the floor. When the chains fell away, she didn't speak. The girls stared at her, wide-eyed, silent. June turned to Lyle. "It's done," she said, but her voice cracked. Lyle knelt beside her, one arm around her shoulders. He didn't say, "You're safe now." He didn't say, "I'm proud." He just held her while the house burned down around them and the sky began to lighten with the color of forgiveness. They rode home through ash. It took 3 days to return north. The wind was high and dry, and the hills behind them smoldered like a war had passed through. June didn't look back once. The dragoon rested in her saddlebag, cleaned and wrapped in cloth. Lyle rode behind, rifle slung, eyes scanning the horizon like a man who had nothing left to kill but everything still to protect. They didn't speak much. No need. The words had already been spent, paid out like blood. What remained between them was a kind of silence only earned through fire and survival. A silence that hummed like a buried wire, connecting every breath to something greater than breath. On the second night, she reached across the campfire and took his hand. He didn't flinch, she didn't cry. It was not a gesture of romance, but of return, of home. Spring came late that year. The rains were hard. The soil turned black and rich, and the garden gave more than it ever had. Chickens hatched healthy. A cow birthed twins. June set up traps along the east ridge to catch foxes. She buried the dragoon in a cedar box beneath the old stump. Not out of guilt, out of honor. A weapon that had done its work should rest. Lyle built her a room off the side of the house, not a cellar. A real room with a window, a desk, a door that closed easy. She furnished it with what she needed, spare boots, a stack of paper, a lamp that burned clean. She wrote names down sometimes, not to remember, to release. One morning in early June, a rider approached from the south, not a bounty hunter. Not law, just a courier with dust on his boots and a letter in his satchel. June opened it beside the stove. It was from one of the girls, the oldest. Her name was Clara. She made it to Wyoming, was living with a family that didn't ask about scars. She was learning to read, wanted June to know she was alive. June folded the letter carefully and set it in the box beneath the dragoon. She didn't smile. But her hands were steady. The town spoke less of her now. Whispers had dulled into myth, and those who had bought from Handley or stood silent in the face of his crimes had either vanished or changed their names. June walked through town with her chin high. No one dared meet her gaze too long. Some men nodded. Some women looked away. A few came up quiet and left eggs or bolts of cloth in her saddlebag without saying why. She took nothing for granted, but she took it all. She had earned it. On their third spring together, Lyle asked without asking. They stood in the north field, the air sweet with rain, a calf wobbling to its feet nearby. "Place is too big for one name," he said. June looked up, brushed dirt from her palms. "Then give it mine," she said. They never spoke vows. There was no preacher, no ring, but she took his name not as a gift, but as a blade. And when people came by the homestead and asked who she was, Lyle would glance toward the porch where she stood, arms crossed, shadow long against the house. "She's my bride forever," he'd say. And though the land had never been gentle, it stayed quiet after that, as if it knew not to provoke what it couldn't unmake, because she had survived hunger, fire, and the weight of unspoken names. Because she had taken death and taught it who to follow, because her silence was no longer grief, it was power.